Um, Hi everyone. I'm Ramona, Arora, and I'll be moderating today's event. So thank you all for joining in. Today we'll be talking about how to best highlight your strengths in interviews with Srujani, who's also a product manager at Adobe. So before we start, I always like to just walk through and give a little bit of introduction about Products by Women and how deeply I'm in love with this organization. So it's just a diverse global community network for women innovation, tech, and beyond. The network, just like this, offers women the opportunity to connect and learn from peers from around the world, find jobs beyond borders, and get matched with recruiters and mentors to accelerate their career. I know COVID has been like very challenging in many ways, but for Products by Women, we've actually grown and expanded virtually through this whole duration. So you can see across US, India, Canada, Singapore, Amsterdam, UK, and there's always more to come. Just a little bit about is happening right now. We're actually hosting our first Products by Women Awards. We believe that good work should be recognized both at an individual and company level, especially amongst women in tech, product, impact, and innovation. We all know that women are still very underrepresented in technical fields, and this is our little contribution globally to change that. So please, visit our website, nominate yourself, or nominate anyone that you think needs to be celebrated. We have awards going on around for product management, tech, UX, engineering, and more. So I hope you guys will find this useful and actually will go and nominate someone. But just a note on the side that I'll always be cheering for all of you. So don't ever feel like you don't deserve it. Another thing is like you can always go and check our events at our website. We actually even have another event coming up, which is for Asian women in tech for good. This is actually a collaboration between three organizations: Life Room, Open Meal, and Products by Women. These women are doing incredible work during the COVID-19 scenario, and we would love to see you there. You can also connect with all of us through Slack, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Now, I know all of you are here not to hear me blabber, but actually to learn more about Srujani. So I would love to just go ahead and introduce Srujani before we get started. So Srujani is a product manager at Adobe and is working on Adobe Dimension, which is actually a 3D design software. She drives innovative product vision inspired by customer-driven design with a technical background in animated feature films and designing for cutting-edge AR and VR experiences. And she actually has a very appropriate name, which I absolutely agree. She is a very, very creative person, and that's what her actual name translates to. She loves working on 3D graphics and visual design. So we're really excited to have you here. Thank you for joining in, Srujani.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here as well. I've said that multiple times over the last week, but I really am excited to be here.
Yeah, we would love to just get started and get to know you a little, like about your journey. How did you get started into product management?
Yeah, I have a slide right after this that shows a little bit of, I guess it's exposing myself a little bit because that first picture, I was 19 years old and very hopeful to work on Kung Fu Panda movie. It was one of my first most favorite movies and was very moved by the visuals and the way that the story was conveyed through it. And so when I was back in college, I really wanted to work on a Kung Fu Panda movie. So I went to a BITS in Hyderabad in India, and I started with an internship at DreamWorks and moved on to being a technical director there. I worked in the lighting department, and yeah, that's a picture of I think my last day at DreamWorks in India. After that, having done that, I did get to work on Kung Fu Panda 3, but I didn't get credits for it. I got credits for another movie called The Boss Baby. And I wish I could move my screen, but I have this big poster of The Boss Baby here. But having worked there and having gotten that movie making experience, I started feeling like I understood that my day to day was not what I wanted to do, because I was a technical person. My day to day was scripting and programming, and I really liked the decision making aspect of movies, even, or in general. I kind of liked my boss's job, so I moved on to doing a master's in entertainment technology. It's a little bit of an obscure degree, but it's a mixture between the School of Drama and the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon. And there I got to work with a lot of AR and VR technologies. And I moved in, that's where I think I paused my technical side a little bit and moved into design and user research kind of things, user testing, because it was very gaming oriented. So we call it play testing, which I kind of translate to user testing when I come back to product management land. And then I started off with an internship at Adobe, working with Adobe Dimension. And I've been a full time product manager with them for a year and a half almost. Yeah, and nights and weekends, I'm spending a lot of time getting back into my art, um, connecting with people via different communities. And yeah, I think with COVID, like everyone, there's just a few hobbies resurfacing, I'm sure, for everyone. So mine was going back into drawing and a little bit of videography and video editing. But yeah, that's me. A little bit more about Adobe Dimension, which is the product I work with. It's a 3D layout and rendering software. And if you go to the next slide, I have a couple of examples. So we're aiming to bring the ease of use and Adobe user experience into the world of 3D, and customers use it for just enhancing their creativity into 3D. So it's what you're seeing here. We call it creative play. It's whimsical, it's fun, and it's just bringing new ideas. I especially like the one in the center. It's by one of our artists in-house. He calls it pipe dreams, and I love that. We also have in the next slide, you'll see that there's examples of our digital photography or product design and product rendering. So it's if you have a logo that you want to make it more realistic or present it in a 3D atmosphere. So this would be a good tool to do that, to render it. And then the next slide, it's just photoreal character development and environment rendering. So that's the world that I'm in right now. That's about me.
This is awesome. I feel like with your journey, one of the things, I guessing everyone else is realizing too, is like you thought about certain things, but you also were determined to make those things or even try it out. You kept moving on to the next stage to even just figure out, okay, where is this going to take me if I don't try it out? Which I think kind of even describes your creative aspect. You just went in with everything you knew and everything that's aligned to your goals and core values, and you went ahead and succeeded in these. And thank you for sharing these wonderful images. They all look amazing. Just to get started a little bit, like there's just so many resources available for product management specifically. Oftentimes we hear people really want to get into it, and Adobe is a company that people often dream about, being a part of. What do you think are literally the top skills, according to you, to become a successful product manager?
Yeah, I really like this question. It is the center of what we're going to speak about today, but also it's not a question I can answer directly. I don't have an answer for that. The most direct I can tell you is,
सुनना है मुझे बस
I'm sorry.
मुझे कुछ सुनना है
Is
मतलब
someone
मेरी हो रही है मेरे को नहीं बात करनी मेरे को सुनना है
I'm gonna wait a second.
Oh, I think it's
Record.
someone who was on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so with respect to top skills, I think the most direct answer I can give you is that it depends. I think a good reframing of that question is, what are the top skill areas? because product management is what I've learned in the past year of like me uh, coming into product management, and also asking that same question to other people at Adobe, asking that question to some of my mentors who I've known since DreamWorks and at Google and other places. I've learned that it's not a science, it's more of a practice. So if you go to the next slide, I have these three buckets that I put in, and only very recently I've come across, and I've put the reference over here. Uh, Someone that talked about these three big areas for any product manager, and I completely agree. It's either strategic, analytic, or having some organization skills. So if you go to the next slide, I have a few of these skills that are put up in each of these buckets. And this is by no way an exhaustive list of every skill, but it is, in my opinion, an exhaustive list of the categories in which any skills will fall into. So next time you ask someone, which I've done for quite some time, I've asked people, what does it take to be a product manager? I have been asked, what does it take to be a product manager at Adobe? And I look around at my colleagues and I'm like, we all bring different things here. But what is that? What how can I categorize those different things into something that's tangible? And what it means is every product manager has one of these, one thing from each of these, and it's important. And as you go into your product management journey, I think you pick up more and more of each of these. And there's other things that people will tell you, things like you should be good at negotiation. That would fall in, according to me, into the organization skill, right? You have to have good interdisciplinary communication. Again, it's some kind of organization, execution, communication, kind of that third bucket. And be good at user research, be good at user experience design. And I think that comes into product sense and strategic and those kind of management. So in the next slide, I've actually highlighted the ones that I felt was my set of skills coming into this job. So when I applied for the internship last year and first started working with Adobe, I think I came in with domain knowledge. I knew the world of 3D, I knew the world of rendering. I have worked with 3D artists as a technical director. A lot of my job was working with 3D artists. So I bring that. Not everything in that, you see, but there's a lot of play testing, like I was talking about, testing and research that I got from my master's. And then communication, I think that was definitely a big part of all of my jobs and internships. So I think it's important to know what your strengths are, and it really depends which one it is. Yeah, so every product manager carries some combination of each of these in each bucket, but it's important that you have one in each. And it definitely depends on the product, the project, what they're hiring for. If they're hiring for a growth PM, then you definitely need to know how to do KPIs and metrics. But if they're looking for a PM that's trying to disrupt a market, then your domain knowledge, product sense, and market sense needs to be good. Your knowledge of competitors needs to be good. So it really depends on what you're applying for and what you're hiring for, what they are hiring for, and how you match with them. So I think this was very important for me to know when I started off, because I was changing job roles, but I wasn't changing industries. I was coming from an adjacent industry. So I think it was important that I know that I have this domain knowledge. So I keep that pretty solid. And I come in and I say, here, I know exactly how 3D artists work, but I don't know so much about, let's say, metrics and analytics and, what market research means. And that's okay. That's when you're starting off as a product manager, you need to know which ones your strengths are, and then you should be able to translate that uh, into an interview and into talking about that in your when you're talking about your projects. I hope that makes sense.
It absolutely does. I feel like these questions are often asked by people, right? Like, okay, I'm just changing my job role, but I'm not maybe changing my industry, for example. And what people face a lot of issues in translating is like not having that initial confidence, I guess, to be like, okay, can I even talk about product management at all? And this really makes sense how, characterize your experience and your strengths based on these three different buckets, and then decide how you want to present it when you're talking to the other person, because I feel like it's all about the presentation and going through and seeing the way your experience went by. You always showed excitement and passion for the role, but you also show the skills that make you passionate for that role or a fit for the role, if I'm getting it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very important, and it's just simply important to understand that every product manager is built different. Every product manager is special, and it's for a good reason. And there is a place for you out there, and not every PM role is for you. And that's a good thing because you bring something very special and specific to the table, and it's important you find the role that will appreciate the strengths that you bring. And talking about changing industries, right, or changing job roles within an industry, I think one thing that I didn't put on here, which is also important, is translation. Like I touched upon it a little earlier, but coming from games or VFX or whatever, for me, user research was not the word that we used. We called it play testing. But it's important to understand that it is a form of an analytic skill, and then bring it into this, and maybe translate that terminology into something that's more appropriate for the industry that you're going into. It's important to understand that at the end of the day, you do have these knowledge, you do have these skills. It's probably just not called the same thing. And initially, when I was making this, I put in every word that I've heard about product managers, and they all fit into one of these three things. And I encourage anyone else that's learning about product management to, every time they come across something, to look at this and see, does it fall into one of these three buckets? And how do I translate my existing knowledge, maybe from a different industry, into these same terms?
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. I feel like it's incredible how you used your technical background and made it work in product management, because I see that in your strategic skill set, you've highlighted customer knowledge and not technology. Was there a particular reason why you did that?
Yeah, well, so technology is an interesting term there, I guess. In some ways, yes, I do know a little bit about the technology, but I moved from a movie production pipeline, which is a different kind of technology, to software as a service, which is, it's a web, or sorry, it's a desktop application. Adobe Dimension is on your desktop. So what I was doing usually was also working with desktop application, but I was spending a lot of time on the terminal, on scripting things that was behind it. I was spending a lot of time on the renderer. So technically there is some overlap in the technology, but I wouldn't say that's why they should hire me. I would say what I brought to the table over other candidates would be that the 2 years spent working with world class lighting artists, that I don't think even if I knew the technology really well, it would be paralleled by that.
Absolutely. And we would love to know, like, when you highlighted all these trends, what were like maybe some of the projects that you worked on that really helped you highlight it better? Or if you could walk us through that.
Yeah, let's see. When I was in my master's, I worked on a virtual reality project called, funnily enough, we called it a board, which definitely tripped a lot of people up. But it was exploring virtual reality homes to see how maybe in the future for some people could VR homes be a possibility. It based itself on some existing research that told us that it's possible for some people in the future who live in enclosed, very small spaces, who have two homes as children of divorces, who have to travel a lot away from home, would definitely find some kind of, let's say, solace in a virtual home to come back to. So we had this existing knowledge and we built upon it. And most of what I did with that project was I was the user experience researcher. And I had never done anything like that before. I just jumped into it. That's what happens when you're in school. You do things that you've never done before. But it was extremely challenging for me, and I learned a lot of new things there. And that's why I'm now able to uh, be confident in my skills of user research or testing, because we had to test things right from low fidelity prototypes, right? Just like show them pieces of paper, to actually prototype an entire room with two people in VR headsets and say, okay, you're in separate rooms and you need to talk to each other. And what are you thinking? What are you seeing? I definitely had good mentorship in school and got trained for uh, the right humane practices of user research. There's like a certification you can take to work with uh, people, right people from various age groups. And another important thing about user testing is recruiting the right users. So even though this was virtual reality, this was, you can see how different in a way it is from what I do right now. There's a lot of these concepts that I was able to translate. So recruiting the right users, recruiting the right customers for your product when you're testing it is important. You can't, you might get the wrong data if you are asking the wrong people all the right questions. So yeah, I think that was one of the things that definitely helped me in terms of my projects before joining Adobe as an intern. And after I joined Adobe as an intern, also I kind of focused on projects that helped me, but those are those are too many to get into now. But I'll get into one that's bigger.
Yeah, no, thank you for walking through that. That's so incredible. The idea that you worked on is just not something I could have thought about, but it really talks a lot about how taking initiative is important rather than just thinking and pondering over it. It's important to know that, okay, if you want to try out something, just go ahead and do it, because you'll come out of it learning something and you can at least showcase something during these interviews or during transition. So, thank you.
Yeah, I do understand that. I think going for a master's program or a program like mine sometimes helps you short circuit that process of taking initiative. You have to do it for class, you have to do it for credits. You have mentors, you have people who co-write, co-author papers with you, and you have all these resources. But not everyone that's transitioning into product management gets that buffer time of doing that, right? Stopping their life and just doing projects. So I understand that there is a kind of friction there to do it while you're in your current job. And I think for me, what has helped and what even right now helps is to still, even if it's a small project, even if it's something that might not have as high an impact as my full-time job, I try to make sure that I'm challenging myself in one of these skills that I don't have yet, or I'm not fully focused on yet. And I think I have that written in my next slide. The next couple of slides actually talks about that. So I found this data yesterday. I've quoted the source, so I don't know much else about like how many people were surveyed. So uh, this is the user researcher in me talking. But yeah, so this is interesting to me. No matter what the percentages are, that hiring managers say being good at interviews is not the same as being good PMs, or hiring managers say that coaching can help your team's performance, and hiring manager wants to see translatable work examples. And all of these are really useful things, and I can definitely see that being something that we can apply when we are looking to transition or looking to break into product management. There are things you're already probably doing that translates well into being a product manager. And in the next slide, I think whether it's your pet projects, whether it's your projects at work, I think it's time to start asking what's the right project for me. And this is something that I've started doing only very recently, but I'm very happy to have a manager who helps me through it and says, "Oh, here's a challenging project for you because it's going to make you do things that you haven't done before." But also, it's important to do projects that highlight the strengths you already have, so that it bolsters you, it sets you up for success, and it helps other people understand what your strengths are, like hiring managers to understand what your translatable skills are. And how do you do this, right? How do you pick on this? And for me personally, when I started my Adobe internship, before I came full time onto Adobe Dimension, I was an intern with the Dimension team. And I think something that really helped me was, if you could move to the next slide, um, it was about finding mentors and peers and getting championed. This is extremely important, and I will say that I think I was lucky that I had a manager, my hiring manager, my mentor, my peers. They were all very supportive, and I asked questions about success. And I think that's the one good thing that I did. And even at the time, I didn't realize that it was so useful to me. But what happened was, my idea of what success is was way higher than what their idea of success was, because we tend to hold ourselves to extremely high standards, and you want to say, I want to, make everything happen. When I joined, I said, I'm going to create an online community for Adobe Dimension, and quickly I realized it's such a big undertaking. It's worth a whole another person's job. That's why they have something called a community manager. So it was good to ask them, hey, I want to do this, and this is the problem I want to solve. What does success mean to you? And they helped me scope it to, how about we explore this? And if you're able to run a pilot program for 3 months, that is success. So it's very measurable, it's very time constrained. And when you do that, you kind of set yourself up for success automatically, right? You're already uh, telling yourself, what success means, and you know exactly how to do it. If you don't, you should have that conversation too. And that's the third point, which is always keep channels of communication open. This is also extremely hard sometimes when you're new, and at least for me, I think it took me some time to be comfortable with saying, I want feedback. And we all say that we want feedback, but we also want to prove to people that we're doing really well and we've got this and all of that. And it's important to again always look back at your chart of like, it's okay, I have strengths, and it's okay to always ask about questions about my weaknesses and see how I can improve on those. So keeping that channel of communication open with your whoever you've met, right? Your mentors, your peers. It doesn't have to be people you're working with, but as long as you keep that open, I think it definitely helps you succeed in your early stages.
I absolutely agree with the feedback point. I feel like I often say this a lot, that I really like feedback, which I do. But maybe essentially when I said it, I didn't mean it as much as I do now, because there's so much that you can get as feedback, especially from your peers who are going through the same journey as you, can probably provide you more insight into how they do things, and how you can broaden your perspective around it. So these points are so true, Srujani. Thank you for sharing them with us. Now,
Sure.
I would love for you to walk us through the 3D text feature that we spearheaded this year, because
Yeah.
we'd love to just get into that and see how you utilized your skills through it.
Yeah, it's an excellent segue. It's kind of like a foreshadow with these artwork of text objects. But if you could go to the next slide, you'll see that these are some of the renders that we've had. Some amazing artists do. Both of them have designed splash screens for Dimension at some point, and you'll see on the left there's text on the bottom and then text up here. And this is something that you couldn't be. This is a new text feature in Dimension as of April this year, so you couldn't do that in Dimension before. And one of the things that I want to bring back is again, when you're executing, when you're looking at any features, you're always relying on those skills that come from one of those three buckets. And if you could go to the next slide, I have this thing posted about identifying customer needs. And this was, I think, one of the most important parts of this particular feature. I will say that I quote unquote inherited this feature. I wasn't on it right from the get go, and I inherited it after this prototype was made. But what's important here is identifying a customer need. So just like you keep channels open for feedback for yourself, you also need to keep channels open for feedback for your product. So we have product feedback that we collect on a public forum called User Voice, and extrude vectors as 3D shapes. What you see on the top left was the most requested feature, the top requested feature. But what does that really mean? Like people wanted a shape that they made in Illustrator to become 3D so that they can use it in Dimension. That's a great idea. But then we went into more depths of that. We said, let's go and interview some actual Photoshop users and see, because Photoshop already has this uh, extrude vectors feature. We saw that most people that actually extrude vectors were extruding text. So it's important to not just listen to your customers, but to identify them. So that's where the customer knowledge comes in handy. So you're not blindly listening to, that's what they asked you to do, and that's what we're doing. It's more about understanding their overall needs and underlying needs even. And what we did right after we identified this need for text, and both text and another feature called basic shapes that I'll for now not touch upon. But we made this prototype, and like I think I've said it a couple of times by now, testing I'm very comfortable with. So we got together the right users. Who were the right users? They were people that use Dimension a lot. They came from a typography background, or they have some kind of 2D background where they use type. And we asked them to test. We quickly made this Unity prototype. It's not even in Dimension. We just said, you know, what would be nice to have in this? And we put in every feature. So those are a bunch of sliders that we put in. Not all of them made it. The more important ones made it. And we saw what our users were creating with this prototype. And we saw that they were using some features, they were confused by some other features. And something that we didn't think was important, or we at the time didn't realize was as important, was them being able to change fonts. First thing that anyone did internally when we played with this prototype was change all these sliders, play around with the depth, with the bevel effects. First thing that our users did when they used this prototype was change the font. They said, I need to get my right font first, and then I'm going to see if all these other sliders work. So it's important to see that their values, what the things that they value is very different, or could be very different from what you anticipate. So it's important to test early. And then we got an idea that, you know, fonts are important, and only these inner features are important. We speak to our engineering team and they say, you know, it's going to take so and so amount of time. So we scope it out to, let's have an MVP, let's have a phase one of this text feature that will be good enough for people to actually start picking it up and using it. But it doesn't have to be everything ever. And so that's important. And that's where the third bucket of execution comes in, where you have the acceptance criteria. You say, well, this is a good feature if it has these criteria. And you put that forward, and next thing you do is after you release it, you measure it. You have to check how you're doing. So in the next slide, I talk about measuring the performance of this feature. How do you measure the adoption? And we saw that about 11.7% of our users 8 weeks into this feature launch were creating text, which is a pretty healthy feature adoption rate, given that not every one of our customers uses text, as you saw in the beginning. Some people use it for just fun, creative stuff. Some people use it for product photography. So not everyone's using it for this. Like this would come into the fun, creative aspect. So not everyone uses that, but among that, if we have 11.7% of text creation, text objects being created, that's pretty healthy feature adoption. But what's most interesting is that we had very high feature engagement. So we had 12% of people in 8 weeks coming back and editing the text, so which means more people were actually editing text in a month. This is a monthly active use. More people were editing their text in a month than they had created, which means they're not just creating text and letting it be and then starting a new document. They're coming back and they're editing it and they are saving it. And it means that the thing that they've created, whatever they have in their document, it's important to them. They're coming back and making changes to it. And I think that's what I would call success, right? Yeah, so I think these, you can see how each feature still draws from each of those buckets, and that's why a PM needs to have one from every bucket, because you just simply can't start do a feature start to end without one of those things. So we went through. If you go to the next slide, I actually highlighted again the things that I ended up using. So the ones that are in italics are the new things that I had to do. It strengthened my existing skills, right? I was able to talk to people that I already know how their mind kind of works. I was able to test with a prototype. I've done that before. User research, definitely one of my things. But I've never had to do analytical measurements. I've never had to reframe a problem. Um, and this was an interesting way for me to do that. But if I were to jump into a project where my strengths were not even part of the problem, and if I only had to focus on my weaknesses, then it would end up being difficult for me to even champion myself. But what it ended up helping me do is show my peers and my mentors, my manager, that yes, this is worth something championing Srujani for. But also Srujani got to learn something out of this, uh, executing and aligning with fonts team. Adobe and fonts is a very big, Adobe is fonts, right? So there's a whole other team that works with fonts. And once we realized that fonts are important, I had to coordinate with this other team, which was more than I thought was a part of our scope, but you take it as it comes. And in doing that, I completely understood what alignment among different products or different groups or teams means. And it's really important as well. And everything in this is important. And like I said, it's not an exhaustive list. There's other important things, but you're going to come across them as you do more projects.
Thank you so much for walking us through all of that. I feel like the way you tied each of these buckets to your experience and how you utilize them in your project and actually even grew from the project is incredible. And I feel like you said about the feature engagement, it's really interesting to see that, you know, at the end of the day, metrics and KPIs do matter because you want to measure the success of your product and your feature. So it's very interesting to see how it grew and actually ended up becoming pretty successful. It looks really cool to me. So it definitely does look cool. I mean, just to move forward, I know that, we talked a lot about these skills that are mostly targeting not just your technical background, but your behavioral background and all of that. Now, before I get into Q&A, one of the things that Srujani and I, just for the audience to know, we connected upon a lot was diversity and inclusion. I feel like most of the times people forget that value add is so important as an aspect when you're interviewing or when you even want to be part of an organization. And I'm going to just let Srujani talk about this because it's amazing what she's done, just getting into Adobe and, heading this whole D&I initiative and just doing her bit in so many other ways, not just at Adobe. So, can I just let you talk about it, Srujani?
Yeah. Yeah, so if you can move to the next slide, I definitely want to maybe clear the air that it's not a DNI initiative because there's definitely a lot of good work happening at Adobe around that, but I'm not directly involved with that because it's more on a specialized team side. But to be honest, I'm a product manager on a product team, but I felt like there is more things to be done. I felt like inclusion is everyone's responsibility. You don't have to be an expert at anything, like a hiring. You don't have to be a hiring manager. You don't have to be a human resource expert to make your community and the things around you more diverse and inclusive. So with the as you might have all heard and seen with all of the Black Lives Matter movement that happened during the summer and still going on, there was a lot of things in motion. Adobe sponsored about $2 million in donation to this cause. They were doing donation matching. A lot of our colleagues and myself, we were all really involved. Some people were extremely involved. Uh, but what happens in some of these times is that outside of your workplace, you hear about this, and it tends to not be a conversation that you have day to day in your workplace. And workplace conversations itself have changed because of working from home. You don't have casual conversations anymore. So, what I felt was it's important to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement inside my workplace because in talking to my roommate who's works in a design firm, and she was talking about how her manager, a black woman, said that she's faced this before where there's a lot of uproar and there's a lot of uh, things spoken about the movement, but then she comes back into work and nobody at work is talking. Her day-to-day job hasn't changed, her day-to-day interactions haven't changed, and I think that really stuck with me, and I felt like that does need to change, and it's important, and it's all of our responsibility to make sure that it's that we make sure that we create an atmosphere where you retain people. So diversity hiring is one thing. People, you getting people in the door is one thing, but making a workplace that's comfortable for people from every background to be able to retain is everyone's job. So what I did was I started a weekly. It was a bi-monthly. Sorry, bi-monthly series, which is now a weekly series, where I started lunch meetings and I said, let's go back, read something, watch something. It was kind of like a study group, and come back and talk about these things. And it really got people to talk about where they're coming from. In my immediate team, there is no black person. We have very few people of color in our immediate team. And these are not things that we talk about at work, right? But we have to start questioning sometimes why we don't talk about some things. Are they uncomfortable? Sure. But why are they uncomfortable? It's just because we're not used to it. It's just something that's not come up in our workplace historically, so it doesn't come up currently. So it was important for me to like either there was a community that's already there, you participate in it. We didn't have one. We didn't have uh, anything happening inside the workplace. So I had to create this lunch series where we talk about it. And well, it's still going on, and it's getting a little, it's slow and it's getting a little more traction. But I think uh, what I've done apart from that is like going through a course together. So I post daily work that we have to do, some small reading, like 5 minute video that we have to watch. And it was nice because the conversations then organically moved into, well, what can we do as me, as an individual, as Srujani, as XYZ, my colleague who is in charge of hiring. What can I do differently now? And I think those are very important things to reflect on inside by creating communities inside your workplace. We do things like order lunch from a black-owned restaurant every week when we meet, and those are small changes, but I think it's important changes. And yeah, and I think the one on the right side, it's just something that I'm coming out fresh of. It says 3 days ago. It's very much from 3 days ago, but my undergrad school had a hiring drive where I think women were sent emails, recruitment emails before the men. Context of that, or like the details of that aside, there was a lot of uproar of women don't belong in STEM, and women. There was a lot of kind of misogynistic outrage against women. The women that got these technical opportunities were harassed and trolled online because they didn't score as well as the men that didn't get in. They were called diversity hires in a kind of derogatory way. And when speaking to some of these women, I saw that they were defending their position. They're like, "Oh, I went and found another job completely by myself. I'm a 9 on 10 GPA," and the imposter syndrome hit very early. So it was important for me, and a few of us gathered and we wrote this open letter, and we said, whatever the outrage was, it was not directed in the right way. And we wrote another section where we wrote a message to these women, and we said, you don't have to defend yourselves, you have to celebrate your success. And we asked for endorsements, and we're almost at 300 people that have signed this letter. And we've asked for some administrative reforms and such. And I'm happy to send this out. I don't know how, but it would be a good read for people to, if anyone's interested. But yeah, I think, like I said, art and community is my nights and weekends right now. So,
And that's what makes you who you are. You're this incredible person, and I'm happy to share this with the. If everyone's on the Slack community, I'll be happy to pass it on so you can read as to what Srujani actually wrote, and the blog written by the team. But to I know we talked a lot about a lot of different segments. So does anyone have any questions from beginning to end, everything we've discussed? Feel free to just jump in and ask us questions. You can unmute yourself. Completely
yeah,
fine.
I know it was a lot. I have a takeaway slide at the end. Like, if you take away 3 things, and I have a gift that like will help you remember. um, but yeah, happy to answer questions.
Hey, Srujani. How'd you come up with the 3 buckets?
How did I come up with the 3 buckets?
Yeah.
So I've quoted someone. Let me find this person. His name is Shreyas, and there's a Twitter link to them. So he called he didn't call it buckets, but he called like 3 legs of what a product manager would do, and he called it analytical and execution and product sense. And it's just part of me sitting down and thinking that, oh, that makes sense. And I went back and looked at all the different skill sets that I've been told is important to become a product manager, and I mapped that to these different buckets. The skill sets that I see in my peers and mentors, and I put that down in these buckets, and it started making sense that these are almost mutually exclusive. So if there's a new set of skill that anyone else would tell you, I'd bet that it falls into one of these 3 buckets.
Thank you. I actually have another question too, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, out of all your professional opportunities so far, what do you think has been the most impactful?
That's a really good question. Would you want to define what impactful is?
what do you think has made you not even necessarily the product manager, but like the person that you are?
I guess it all piles up over time, and I think for me, if I had to pick one part of my journey, I think it would be um, I think it would be this past very recent past year. I think it's where most of my growth as product manager happened. I think until then I was a bit in flux of an identity crisis. So I'm a little technical. I'm not product manager yet, but I think some of these opportunities, like the text initiative that I got to spearhead, it was very important in kind of cementing myself and feeling like I'm a product manager and I know what it takes to successfully ship a feature or a product. Thanks for your questions, Brian.
Sorry, I cut you in between. What did you say, Srujani?
Oh no, I just said thanks.
Oh, I was just saying that was a good question. Anybody else feel this is not as formal as maybe I'm making it sound? So just feel free to ask any questions that you want. It'll be fine.
So, hey, I have a question for the success. So you mean like set up the success point for yourself? So is that means like you set up success for the project you did, or is the success you want to learn from this project?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think when you're picking your project, if you have the option to, ideally you would pick a project that would play into your strengths a little bit and help you get better at your weaknesses a little bit. And so when you're setting up a success factor for that project, it is for the project, because by definition, it's already helping you set up for success because you've chosen a project that's helping you get better. But if you can't choose a project, and it's still important to understand what success for that project means. For example, if we say, like in this 3D text, what does success mean, right? It could be that we want a certain amount of adoption rate. It could be that we want, well, actually for me, it was being able to see people completely use Dimension for their 3D text needs. And if we're able to solve that problem, then it's successful. And so I can come back and say, well, we don't have everything right, but we have this one thing right, and it's successful in these ways, and it lacks in these ways. I hope that answers your question.
I guess.
Did you face any major challenges doing the text feature?
Yeah, I think there's challenges in almost every aspect of it. Like I said, even identifying that as a customer need was a challenge. So doing the right research was important. I think one of the biggest challenges with that feature was coordinating with the fonts team. So when you are your own team, your own bubble of doing, rapidly developing features, that's somewhat of somewhat smooth sailing. But another time, if you have to start working with a whole other team, it's it starts to create almost a new set of requirements that you may not have anticipated before. So one of the things that we had to cater for was, so fonts are not just a drop down menu. Fonts have two drop downs, because one is the font style and one is the font family, which is bold, italic, or whatever else the font comes with. and it's an Adobe standard to accommodate that in every application. So we were initially, as we were ready with, oh, we're just going to read your operating system fonts and do just the minimum basic reading of your fonts. It wasn't good enough, and you have to understand that it's not just a customer need, it's also kind of a standard, the user experience that you're trying to maintain across applications, which will help at the end the customer. So yeah, making sure that I was in sync with this other team and what it means to have fonts. Me and my team, my designer, my engineers, we all are good at what we do in terms of 3D, but we were kind of lost with what does what does fonts do, and what are the technical implications of a font system, what are the design implications. So it was a learning experience for everyone in our team. So we had to kind of all rely on our equivalent counterparts on their team.
Excuse me, I was just wondering if you can just talk about your interview for the Adobe internship that you talked about. It's very interesting because I'm like trying to get also in all of these different interviews, something like the most like necessary part or the trickiest question that you can talk about. Because like,
yeah. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, I'm finished. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is one thing that I feel like is maybe not the most universal experience, but for me, my Adobe interview was for an internship. And it was for an internship for one summer. And I spoke to my manager for about 25 to 30 minutes. And she ended up hiring me after that, after which most of my interview was my 2-month internship. So I think it's not a typical experience of how people get hired, but I feel like my interview kind of lasted those 2 months of internships, and that's why those projects, and asking her what does success mean. Okay, I'm going to go back and do it and give me feedback. That was important. But coming back to your question of like, um, what was the most difficult or I guess surprising question? I'm going to take a minute to think because it was 2 years ago. Um, I think the tricky question was, she asked me, "Can you?" I'm going to not be able to quote it directly, so forgive me for that. But it was around if I could handle product management, product roadmap tasks. And for me, as someone who's coming out of grad school who doesn't know what exactly it entails, it was a tricky question, because how do I say I can handle something that I haven't done yet? And I remember asking her or answering and saying, well, I haven't had a chance to do that, but if by that you mean executing these things in these ways, and I brought it back to some of my own project things that I had done. I said, if that's what you mean by product roadmap planning, then I feel like I'm equipped to do it in like short sprints, but I'm not equipped to do it in extremely long sprints. And that's exactly what I'm hoping to get out of this internship. And I think that interview experience was unique, because it was almost her also asking what I want out of this internship. So I think internship interviews are probably different from full-time interviews, I'd say. Does that help, or at least answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I have a question. I'm seeing a question on the chat. Was the internship part of your master's degree? Did your master's degree have a big part in where you are today? Yes, in some ways, yes. Was the internship part of my master's degree? Actually, the summer internship was not, and then I did another internship, which was part of my master's degree. I was allowed to do one whole semester as an internship, and I said I'll just come back to Adobe and I'll do another internship. Um, I think my master's degree did have a part to play in where I am today, in terms of the projects that I got to do, and I got to play the role of a user researcher in them. But that's just partially helped me where I am today. And then the other bucket, like I said, of domain knowledge came from my first job um, at DreamWorks and being surrounded in this world of 3D and uh, having always worked with visual designers and artists, I think has also helped me to be where I am today.
Anyone else have any questions? I think mostly, like, the way you said, these are really the takeaways, like knowing your skills and your skill gaps and really working on that bucket just for yourself. I feel like this is something personally I'm going to do, is use those buckets, and right before an interview probably read those buckets to myself and see which one works best for me, and then utilize whenever I'm asked a question, trying to work around those. I can really visualize using that bucket situation into my job search or future process. I think that was incredible that you shared it and tied it all together. I think we got another question. Are there any certificates or courses that you might recommend for those just becoming interested in product management?
Yeah, uh, I don't know how much I'm qualified to recommend, not having done them myself. But I have been recommended product school many times. I have been recommended, I think, some product podcasts. I spent a lot of time with product podcasts in my first month and during my internship. And I think the product owner certification is a very useful one. But again, if you, it really depends on which of these three buckets you want to become really good at. So I have colleagues that are extremely good at execution. They're product owner certified. They're really good at product roadmaps and Scrum planning and uh, all of these things. And you could look at certifications around that. There's certifications around, I think, just general data in product or telling stories with data and things around analytics and metrics for product management. And those are useful too. And it's really important to see which ones I think align with where you're coming from and pursuing certifications in those. But if it's a little bit, I think, confusing for me if you're just getting interested in product management. I don't know if certifications is the first thing you would want to do. I think getting to understand the area and what the roles are, I think would be like coming to these talks would be a good thing to do, and looks like you're already doing it.
Does anyone else have any final questions before we wrap up? I don't know. I'm pretty sure Srujani would be happy to connect with anyone afterwards through LinkedIn.
Yeah. And any questions, if you want to ask offline, that's okay too. And yeah, it's important to know your strengths before you use your strengths. So just make sure that you're very well aware of where you're at, and make sure that you're also, whether it's pursuing certifications even or pursuing projects, you're doing it to highlight the strengths you have.
Absolutely.
And if you haven't watched Legend of Korra, this is a very good show, and you should. That's where the GIF is from.
Any final questions?
Great talk.
Did you say something? I'm sorry. I was just asking.
I thought it was a great talk.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yes.
All right, sounds like it's ready to wrap. Thank you so much for having me, Ramona. This was a great session, and I truly believe in trying to pay it forward at least, because that's how I met you. We met on LinkedIn because you reached out and I didn't reach back out in time, but it was because of that philosophy that I'm here today. So thank you.